Hey everyone, welcome back to Unbiased Magic Reviews. Today I have a requested magic review for you. We're going to be taking a look at Julien Losa's Billets for the Modern Mindreader.
Hi, my name is Julien Losa and I'm a magician, I'm a mind reader, basically I'm a lover of all mysteries, and this is my course on billet reading. As you can hear, I'm not English, I'm not American, I'm French. I'm sorry because you're gonna have to deal with that strong accent the whole video. Hopefully I will be more visual than talking, but yeah, sorry, enjoy.
All right, for $29, you can pick up this 33-minute video instructional where Julien Losa is going to demo and explain 5 of his Billet Peek techniques. He goes over a couple of variations, and at the end of the video, he gives you some advice of some card stock you can pick up for billet work. That's pretty much what you can expect to get with this download. There's no actual routines taught here. This is all just raw technique. As usual, I'm going to give you guys my initial impressions, give you a walkthrough of the different techniques you can expect, and then answers the questions you probably have along the way, and then finally give you some final thoughts and some ideas and recommendations of my own. So as you're probably aware, billet work is really the pinnacle of mentalism. And when you can read people's minds with just a couple scraps of paper and a pencil, it just doesn't get much stronger than that. I became familiar with Julien Losa's work about 5 years ago. I read an essay he put out. It was called The Ice Peak. I thought it was really clever. And then he put out his Switch, which was a very open, fair, convincing, innocent looking billet switch, which I absolutely loved. I picked that up about 2 years ago. I really liked some of the ideas he introduced, especially like justifications for even touching a billet, like this idea that you're trying to get an impression from it. I thought all of that was like really clever and I liked it a lot. So I wasn't surprised that this project, Billets for the Modern Mindreader, is absolutely phenomenal. You're gonna learn some techniques here that you can't learn anywhere else. So I think anyone who's a serious student of billet work and mentalism should seriously consider picking this up. It should probably just be required. Now that being said, there are some negative things on here which I'm gonna go over, but overwhelmingly, I think that you're gonna get more from this than what you would expect. And I think that it's probably worth 2 or 3 times what you're gonna pay for it. So let me give you a walkthrough of what you can expect to find here. The first technique is called Lumos, and this is a technique that is based on a move by Al Baker. So Al Baker, back in 1933, he put out a routine in his first book, which was called the Billet Mystery. What Julien has done is he's taken the move and basically turned it into an instantaneous peek. And I think that he's done an excellent job with it. I've been road testing this out now for almost 2 weeks. This is my favorite technique that I learned from this download. It's gonna become your favorite technique. In fact, I'm gonna show you guys what it looks like and give you a good idea, because I don't just tell you guys stuff, I actually really go out and perform it, and I practice it and I can do it, which is why. So what I like to do is I have somebody do a drawing on a billet, and the reason is because I think that the drawing is just easier to glimpse. So that's pretty much what I've done with it. So you have the person make a drawing, they hand you back the billet. I like to hold it like this because this just looks really fair. I put it to my head for a minute. I tell the person, look, that they could see that they can't see anything on the top or the bottom. I ask them, hold out your hand for a second, and I immediately hand it back to them. That's it. That's the whole peek. Did you see how quick it was? So you could see what the move consists of. It's absolutely fast. Now, the one negative aspect about this is that it's a little noisy. You probably heard a little something there. Now, I did perform it one-on-one in like a closed room, and the person who I performed it for didn't even notice anything. They didn't really notice the noise, because keep in mind, You're going from here to here, hold out your hand to here. That's it. So it happens so quick that it feels like there's no way you could have seen anything, because it just happens in this motion like this. But it is a little noisy. So I found that I started to perform it in a more ambient setting with more people around, more noise in the background, and then you don't have to worry about that. But you can do it one-on-one in a quiet room, and it does fly by. It flies by, literally. It will take a little bit of practice to get it smooth like that, because you're not going to be able to get it like that instantly. It's going to take a little bit of practice. But remember, if you don't practice, you're not going to get anything out of it. So it's definitely worth it. I think that this first technique is worth the price of this download, and you're going to use this more than anything else, I think, just because it feels so fair to the people. Now, moving along to the second technique, which is my second favorite technique on this download, it happens to be number 2, is the palm reading peek plot. Now, basically, after you do a switch, you tell the spectator that you want to look at their palm to read their palm to get an impression of what they're thinking of. The premise is very clever, and that whole idea that you want to look at their palm, it totally justifies the motions of why you are even going to do what you do. The motions of, you know, that it helps justify what you're doing, so that way you can get the peak, is what I'm trying to tell you guys. Now, the really strong part of any type of billet routines, like people always say, well, why even do a billet switch? Why do a billet switch? The main reason is this, is because when a person writes something on a piece of paper and they feel that that piece of paper has never ever left their sight, they are convinced that there's no way you could have looked at it. In fact, the last time that I performed Animan's a question and an answer routine, which is a billet routine like that, the person who I performed it for was convinced that somebody else there was actually giving me information, because they were convinced that there's no way I would know what they actually wrote. That is the strength of billet work. Part of the issue with billet work is that a lot of times after a switch, you have to go to your pocket or you have to be seated, because you have to have an excuse for how you actually get your peak. But in this case, this is an excellent way of getting the peak after the switch right under the nose of the spectator. The only real negative aspect here with this was that Julien did introduce his own switch. He demoed his own switch, which looks amazing, of course, because it is, but then he also doesn't explain it. And I thought that that kind of like was a little bit negative. Like, I don't think he shouldn't have talked about his own switch and then said, well, I'll go pick it up from Penguin Magic. I mean, it is only $15 and you should go pick it up because it's worth it. But I just don't think he should have plugged it in here. Instead, I think he should have just done an Animan switch and just taught it briefly, so that way, you know, you could say that this is complete. Because I never like a project where they tell you, okay, to do it, let me show you, I'm doing this, but I'm not going to teach you this. You have to go over there to learn it somewhere else. So I never like that. That being said, though, I think that this technique is an excellent billet peek, and if you already do a billet switch, then this is going to be a piece of cake for you. He does teach a variation that uses a wallet. It uses like a sight unseen case feature of a wallet, which I don't think you need that. I think that's overkill, because remember, the strength of a billet switch is that the billet stays in sight the whole time. That's the strength of it. So anytime that the billet goes out of sight, that's not a good thing. I think the wallet, you're introducing something that you don't need to, and it definitely doesn't make it any better. So I think you should just scratch the wallet idea. I don't think you need that at all. And probably a lot of people would say, well, if I'm using a wallet, I'll just peek it out of the wallet, right? Which is true. So there's no point in using billets and a wallet together. That idea, I don't think, has any place here. The next technique you're going to learn is called hold my wrist peek. And I kind of didn't like that one because it looks like you're putting the billet in your hand and you tell them to hold your wrist. And in that motion is when you're going to get your peek. The problem is that the billet is going out of sight again. It's going inside your hand, apparently. So I didn't really like it. And I think that the other technique, which was the palm reading peek plot, is much better. So I would just avoid the hold my wrist peek. I don't think that you really want to go into that. Following this, he does do a demo where he shows you how you can do a billet peek he just does the demo. He shows you how he peeks a billet through a glass. He doesn't explain it, but it is self-explanatory. And that is a good idea, and I've seen that before in other places. Following that, he does introduce another technique, which is called I Need to Focus Peek. And for me, this was probably the worst item on here, the worst technique, because basically what he's doing is he makes it look like he's holding the billet in his hand and he needs to focus on it and he gets the peek. The problem is that it doesn't look good in his hands. It looks awkward. The angles look bad. It looks like he's doing what he's really doing. So it really doesn't look good. A lot of times a technique will look good in the hands of the creator and not look good in your hands. In this case, it doesn't even look good in his hands. So I would recommend you stay away from this technique that he introduces. And then finally, the last technique, which is called in-hand focus after switch. After a billet switch, you're just focusing on your hand and you're getting a full peek of their billet. And I thought that was excellent. And again, the reason why it's excellent is because this gives you a tool to be able to peek a billet after a switch. Like I said, a lot of times after these billet switches, you have to be seated, you have to go to your pockets, but in this case, you're not going to your pockets. You don't have to be seated. This can be done stand up. And I think it has good angles, and I think the movement is well justified what you're doing because you're just concentrating on their billet. It really looks believable, and I like it a lot. So the three main techniques that I really liked a lot was Lumos, of course, my favorite one, the palm reading peek plot, and then in-hand focus after switch. Those three techniques for me were the best techniques on here. And the two that I really road tested more than anything was the palm reading peek plot and of course Lumos. I road tested Lumos more than anything else, and you could see me demoing it for you. You can see my own comfort level with the move, and that's literally going to become your favorite move. Definitely worth the price of this. Finally, at the very end of the video, he does give you recommendations on the card stock that you can buy for doing billet work in general. And I think that's kind of nice. That's a good thing. Personally, I would rate this download as 4 out of 5. The only reason I don't give it 5 stars is because I didn't like how he introduced his own switch and then didn't teach it to you. So I really didn't like that. But that being said, I think that the other stuff that you're going to learn on here is good. I think some of the variations you're really not going to use. He does teach you like a hat variation with Lumos and a box variation with Lumos where you do Lumos into a box or into a hat, and you're not going to use that either because really you're just going to use your hand. So those variations, even though it's nice to have a little variation here and there, I don't really think you're going to use any of those things at all. So I think this download is definitely worth the price. I highly recommend it to you guys if you're into billet work. If you're not into billet work, I recommend that you check it out because it's not half as hard as you think it is. Some other resources I would recommend is you should check out Animan's Practical Mental Magic, especially the question and answer routine. If you like that, you may want to check out Elliot Bresler's variation in his book Switchcraft, which is called 2 Questions and 2 Answers. Excellent. It's good for any beginner in billet work because the billet switches are easy and the moves are all well motivated. If you can get your hands on Barry Richardson's Act 2, he has a whole chapter in the back that has to do with billet peeks and billet switches, which is really nice too. Those are some just literature. In terms of videos, you may want to check out Bob Cassidy's Billet Killers. I know Alan Zing has put out some videos on billets as well. So this is just scratching the surface for you guys, but there's a lot of good resources out there if you're interested in it. As usual, if you have any questions or comments about this review or anything else that I review, please just leave me a comment below. Thanks so much for tuning into my magic reviews, and this has been another requested magic review.